Today we have a very special game. This was Mikhail Tal's last tournament chess game. He passed away a month after this game was played. This was played in Barcelona in 1992, and his opponent is Vladimir Akopian, who is one of the top players in the world, even today, but at the time he was truly elite. And so this is a very tough opponent for Tal in this final game. And Tal has white, Kopian has black. Let us see how it goes. And it has quite a surprise turn of events as the game progresses, just to let you know. E4 is played by Tal, who has white, c5 by Kopian, knight f3, knight c6, and bishop to b5, the Rossolimo Sicilian, usually used to avoid the Sveshnikov. Black can play a number of moves here, e6, g6, but d6 was Akopian's choice. Castles, bishop to d7, rook to e1, knight f6, and c3. And we can see that Tal wants to play d4 and create a nice full pawn center. Black plays a6, asking a question of the bishop. Where is the bishop going to go? It has a few options. Tal went back to a4. And now c4 from Akopian, a very interesting move. He's basically saying if white plays d4, he's going to take en passant and keep white from having a nice full pawn center. And that is what happens. Tal plays d4. Black takes on e3 en passant. Tal plays bishop to g5. He can collect this pawn later. And threatening to double the pawns on f6. Black plays e6, so the queen defends that knight. And now Tal takes the pawn on d3 and bishop to e7, which looks like it's relieving the pin and avoiding the doubling of pawns. But actually, it is not avoiding the doubling of pawns because Tal goes ahead and takes with his bishop on f6. The problem for black is if he takes with his own bishop, then the d6 pawn would hang. He would lose the d6 pawn. So he has to take with the g pawn. And what we have here is a very standard structure in the classical Sicilian. And it may look worse for black because his king is seemingly stuck in the center, doesn't have a safe place to go. However, it's not that bad, actually. Black has the bishop pair. These pawns control a lot of key squares. And white has to work to break through that structure that black has there. So this is not as bad as it looks at first. This knight on c6 would love to land on the nice e5 square. So Tal takes it off of the board. Bishop takes c6 and c4. And we see what Tal is doing here. He's creating something similar to the Maroczy bind or a hedgehog type structure, trying to restrain black's freeing moves like b5 and d5. And sometimes in this structure, black will even have f5 here. But if white can restrain black, then he should be better. That's the real issue here. Can he do so, or can black free his position and let his two bishops reign supreme? Akopian goes ahead and castles kingside. This may look a little dangerous, but he's just going to play his king to h8, his rook over to g8, and put pressure down the g file. So the king's probably safer over here, despite the pawn damage to the king side. Tal plays knight to c3, king to h8, again planning rook to g8, rook a to d1. Tal just centralizes, places his rook opposite black's queen, rook to g8, continuing with the plan, and queen to e3, a very strong move. Perhaps he can come into h6 and cause some trouble. He's also threatening knight to d5, because if black were to take, white would retake, and both the bishops would be under threat because the queen and rook here would attack. So that's a little tricky idea from Tal. So to avoid that, Akopian plays queen to f8. First of all, it keeps Tal's queen out of h6, and if he plays knight to d5, he can just tuck the bishop back at e8, and then the knight would have to go. So a strong defensive and attacking move from black. Tal plays knight to d4, putting pressure on that bishop at c6, rook to c8 to defend it. And here, computers say that the best move for white was to go ahead and grab that bishop. But Tal plays f4, which is the standard way of attacking this pawn structure from the classical Sicilian. White would like to play f5, put pressure on e6, and force black to play e5. And then you'd get a rigid structure that favors knights over bishops and a really weak square on d5. That's sort of white's strategy here. Akopian moves his bishop back to d7, and of course now he's attacking the pawn at c4. and Tal's not going to give him a second chance for that, so he plays b3, defending that pawn. And now bishop d8 from black, a very strong move, threatening bishop to b6, taking advantage of this weak diagonal from white. And we can begin to say black's probably won the opening and early middle game battle here. Tal seems worse in this position up to this point. He plays knight to f3, so the queen controls b6. The bishop can't go there. And now black plays b5, trying to work on that bind by putting pressure on the c4 pawn, and what he would like to exchange that off to free his position. And here Tal plays queen to a7, attacking the bishop at d7 as well as the pawn at a6. But it's not really like Tal to go pawn hunting, and it maybe wasn't the best choice here. It's hard to say, but Tal is going after material, not something we see very often. Black just plays bishop to c7. That's how he keeps white from taking the bishop on d7. And Tal continues. He goes ahead and he does take that pawn at a6. Akopian takes on c4, and then b4 from white, hoping perhaps that these A and B pawns can advance and cause black some trouble. But black's main idea is to break in the center with d5. That is why he played b5, to get that c pawn away, so then he could break open the center with d5. First, he plays queen to g7, threatening mate on g2, and when Tal plays g3 to prevent mate, then black plays d5, trying to open up the position for those two bishops, and it looks like he's succeeded. Tal takes on d5, but now bishop f4 from black, and he's threatening to take on g3 and just rip Tal's king apart. King f2 was played. After bishop g3 here, hg3, queen g3, then Tal could play king to e2. That's why I played king to f2. And after queen g2, king to e3, it's dangerous, but it's actually a fairly equal position, even though it's probably more fun to play black than white here with the king stuck in the center of the board. But Akopian does something different. He plays f5. The idea is to unleash this queen. He attacks this undefended knight at c3 to sort of get the queen in the middle of the board near white's king. But in order to do that, he has to give up his own dark squared bishop, and that bishop is going to be sorely missed. Pawn takes the bishop, queen takes c3, and now Tal gets to begin to work his way back in the game. He's beginning to get the kind of position he's more comfortable with, and he starts to be able to put pressure on black. He begins with queen to d6, directly attacking the bishop at d7, and he would like to get that queen to e5 to attack black's king at h8. At the moment, if he plays queen to e5, black would just exchange queens. So he has to find a way to get the queen on e5 without allowing the exchange of queens. Akopian responds to the threat to his bishop with bishop to a4, counterattacking the rook at d1. And can you see a way that Tal can get his queen to e5 without having it exchanged? That's right. He moves the threatened rook to d4. It's defended, of course, by the knight at f3. And he blocks off black's queen's access to this very important diagonal. And, of course, the dark squared bishop has been exchanged off. So now the tide is turning. Tal is beginning to get the kind of position he enjoys. Here, Akopian plays rook to g7. Better was probably rook to g6 to keep this e6 pawn under watch a little bit. But after rook to g7, pawn takes, and now the tide is turned. And Tal is beginning to generate a lot of pressure on black's position. Bishop to c6 is played. Now, this looks very strong for black. Just to the eye test, I mean, there's a lot of pressure. Black is threatening to just play queen f3 checkmate right now. But Tal has looked a little deeper. He plays the knight to g5, just threatening to take on f7, just with the pawn would be winning. If queen to b2 check, then just rook to d2, blocks the queen's check. This queen at d6 defends that rook. If fe6, rook e6, and white is coming in, if bishop to e4, then knight to f7 check. If that knight is taken, then queen to e5 check, king moves, and rook to d8 check unveils an attack on the queen with check. If instead king to g8, then a very nice mating pattern here. Queen to d8 check, rook to d8, and then knight to h6 check, forcing the king, well, it could go to f8 or h8, doesn't matter. Either way, rook to d8 leads to mate. And so there are a lot of problems for black here, but Akopian looks like he might have solved those problems with his next move, rook takes g5. And if Tao takes the rook, then queen to f3, king g1, queen g2 is checkmate. So how does he deal with this threat of queen f3 after rook takes knight? Well, remember we were saying he was trying to get on that dark square diagonal? Queen to e5 check. A very strong move, because not only does it deal check, not only does it deliver check, but it has an attack on this queen on c3, which is about to be revealed. And after rook to g7, Tao plays rook to d8 check, exposing this queen on c3. Akopian has to deal with the check, and now queen takes c3. He's won a queen in exchange, a queen and a pawn in exchange for a rook and a bishop, and his position is better and well coordinated, and he has completely turned the tide against his very strong opponent. F6 is played in the game if fe6, rook e6, and White has all sorts of threats. He's attacking the bishop, threatening to pile on the pinned rook at g7. So f6 to try to limit White's attack, but then e7, rook to a8, threatening rook takes a2 check. The rook and the bishop control the queening square for the moment, but queen takes f6. Bishop to e4 is played. If he plays rook to a2 check, just king to e3, rook to a3, then king to d4, and the White's king escapes the threats. So instead, Akopian plays bishop to e4, trying to block the rook's access to the pawn. Now the rook goes to g1, piling on this pinned rook at g7 and threatening mate with queen takes g7. Rook to a2 check is played, and after king to e1, Akopian resigned and Tal won. Let's look at why that is, by the way. If rook to a1 check to get rid of this rook, then the queen can just take that rook. There's no check on a1. And otherwise, it's just rook to d2, and the king just steps out of the way. And the problem is the threat of queening the pawn along with mate. I mean, it's decisive. So after king to e1, seeing this, Akopian resigned, and Tal won. A brilliant end to an amazing career. I hope you've enjoyed this game. See you again soon at Chess Dog. Goodbye.